Hello, welcome to Story Hour. I'm Kathy Ramsperger. I'm a lifelong journalist and humanitarian, and I'm author of the award-winning The Shores of Our Souls and the upcoming in late spring, 1,000 Flying Things. I'm also a coach who founded Ground One, and created Step Into Your Story. Everything I write about is about building bridges and connecting with others. And I'm here to connect people who love books. I concentrate on transformational stories of international interest, multicultural relations, and social justice, and people, connections between people. Our guest today, her novels cover all of these themes because they're both about war and peace and art and love and how they all interconnect. She and I have similar life paths, just like me and Anju from last month, and there are comparisons in our books, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But enough about me. Jeannee Sacken has changed her life around a multitude of times in a multitude of ways. And she loves travel, adventure, and animals. She was an English professor at Rochester Institute of Technology. If you've heard RIT, you know it's the place where Kodak was founded, who decided to become a photojournalist while there and began documenting women and children's lives. Many photographs, and 2 novels later, she's here with an American Best Book of the Year. And I heard a little whisper that she's working on number 3 in a series. Well, I'll look forward to that. And Jeannee lives in Wisconsin with her husband and cat and has more plans in store for her heroine, who is a war photojournalist whose name is Annie Hawkins Green. If you've heard the name Jeannee Sacken, you've heard the name Annie Hawkins Green. Congratulations, Jeannee, and welcome. Thanks for being with us. And will you show us your beautiful book covers and tell us a little about your books?
Sure. First, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this, even though we're blizzarding outside at the moment. And I was absolutely thrilled to publish my first book, which in the Annie Hawkins series. This was also my debut novel, entitled Behind the Lens. This is where we first meet Annie Hawkins Green. She is a seasoned war photographer embedded with the coalition forces in Afghanistan in 2006. She barely escapes a Taliban ambush that leaves her military escort dead and a feisty 10-year-old girl who loves playing with Polaroid cameras and loves photography, named Malala, dying in Annie's arms. Annie feels enormous guilt over Malala's death, thinking that the shooting came right after Annie took her photograph. And so Annie worries that her photograph caused the ambush and Malala's death. Seeking redemption, she, some years later, in 2015, she returns to Afghanistan to teach a photography workshop in Malala's honor at the Wadkol Secondary School for Girls up in the Panjshir Valley of Afghanistan, known as sort of the Garden of Eden of Afghanistan. It's a very peaceful area. And the school is run by her best friend and former college roommate. However, the Taliban find the school and firebomb it, which leads 6 months later to the second book, Double Exposure.
They work so well together in every way.
Aren't they beautiful? I love these covers. They were both designed by the incomparable Kaylee Duntman at 1016 Press. She is an incredible artist, and I feel very fortunate. And she's one of the few artists, book cover designing artists, who works very closely with her author. And so I was thrilled to have the amount of input that I did in the design of these covers. So in Double Exposure, it's 6 months later, we're still in 2015, and Annie comes home from an overseas assignment in Yemen to discover that her 16-year-old daughter, Mel, has organized her friends and classmates to do a series of fundraisers. And they have raised $30,000 to help rebuild the Wad Cole School for Girls. And Annie takes the money with her when she goes on her next assignment to Afghanistan, which is to cover the beginning peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban. And so when she gets to Afghanistan, she takes a side trip up to Wad Cole in the Panjshir Valley. Unfortunately, the Taliban figure out where she is. And that little bird you heard is correct. There is a third book called The Rule of Thirds, another photographic term, and it is in edits right now and will be launched October 3rd of 2023.
Fantastic. So thank you for the description. I was really a little bit afraid I might give away spoilers if I did it, because every page is another gasp. There's a lot happening in these books. Very, very intricate plot. And authors and readers agree with me. They love Annie Hawkins Green and her sometimes precarious adventures in Afghanistan, and her life with her love interest and her daughter. It's quite the combination of choices she has there. And here's a little bit of praise. Kim Sur says Jeannee's books have high stakes situations with no easy outs. And she doesn't take the easy way out either, is what she means. Jennifer Trethaway calls Behind the Lens hair-raising, riveting, raves Rochelle Meliander, and Judy Bridges dares you to read the first chapter and put it down. But the one I want to read in full is from the cultural and sensitivity reader that Jeannee asked to read it. And these words are what every author that writes about other countries and cultures wants. So bear with me while I get it focused here. Behind the Lens is an unbiased exploration of the struggles women face from a patriarchal system in society, religion, education, and profession. Jeannee Sacken writes a poignant and riveting work of art with vivid characterizations and honest dialogue, pulling readers inside her landscape. Her book reveals prejudices, ignorance, and intolerance inherent in mores and customs that favor men and withhold opportunities from women. To overcome these controversial differences, she shows us how sincere and forthright communication is necessary for successful mutual understanding and respect. And that's Heba
El-Kobaitri.
Thank you for that. I wanted to make sure I didn't know whether it had 3 syllables, her name, or 4. What praise from a sensitivity reader. And I want to congratulate you just on that alone. And I always say communication can solve so much. Communication and unconditional love. So let's get to the questions, and we'll get to your questions if you're here live, or you can put them in the replay. If you're watching the replay, and I'll get back to them. And if I can't answer it, I'll make sure I ask Jeannee what the answer is. But we'll break about halfway to see if there are any, and at the end. So Jeannee, we're going to start with art.
Yeah.
What did you do first? Photography, writing, or something else?
I started writing in third grade. Probably before then. I was the kid who always played with my Barbie dolls. My best friend Debbie and I created these elaborate epic sagas with our Barbies. And but then by the time I got in third grade, our teacher assigned us to write a short story. And I was writing away. And you have these big, huge lined pads of paper. And I had 10 pages that I just kept tearing off one after another. And finally, I noticed my teacher was standing by my desk and she said, "Are you done yet?" And everybody else had handed theirs in. And I was still writing, but I just gave the 10 pages to her. And the next day she called me up to the front of the room while she read it. And I wanted to sink through the floor. I thought I was in trouble because she had said, write about something. I wrote about a shepherd tending camels in a desert. Go figure. I knew nothing about any of those. But at the end, she said, "Boys and girls, we have an author here, and someday you're going to find her novel in a bookstore." And that was probably one of the most empowering comments a teacher ever made.
What a teacher can do for a child or student.
Yeah. And fast
How
forward,
precious.
I went to graduate school, became a university professor, and creative writing sort of went by the wayside as I was doing academic writing.
Yeah.
When I ended up leaving academia, I to become a photographer and a photojournalist. I started out very early on working on a documentary essay of the lives and work of women and children, but I thought I wanted to do something a little different. I really wanted my viewers at my gallery shows to get to know my subjects in the same way I had. And so whenever I had a gallery exhibit, the gallery would print a catalog, or they would have these beautiful cards with the stories behind each of the photographs telling something about the subject. And from there, I took it a step further and decided I really wanted to get back into creative writing. And so I started out with stories and short stories, which I am not good at. And they evolved into novellas. Nobody wants to buy novellas. And so from there, I created a novel. And the first novel I wrote was featuring a main character named Annie Hawkins Green. And it was set in northern Mexico at the Maquiladoros. And she was part of a UN team going down to investigate the abuse of women in the Maquiladoros. My roundtable critique group loved it. My beta readers all loved it, except for one beta reader who said, "Hey, I don't think it really holds together how to sink someone." So I read through it again, and she was right. It didn't hold together. So I shelved it, went back to it sometime later, because I couldn't stop thinking about Annie Hawkins Green. And I wanted to salvage something in the book. She was whom I salvaged, and I changed her from being a UN attorney, a human rights attorney, to being a photojournalist, because I know a lot more about that. And she said, "Well, thank God you finally came to your senses and made me a photojournalist." And I said, "Well, I know about that." And she said, "But I'm a war photographer." And she just had to get something in there. So, there was this back and forth between photography and writing, and then I blended them both in this series.
You did. You did it so well too.
Oh, thank you.
And about how long was it that you let it sit? I mean, if you don't mind, was it a while?
Mhm.
Because I'm thinking, gosh, one beta reader, I kind of felt sad. I kind of want to hear that Mexican story, right? Or did and I'm going to go ahead and ask this. Why Afghanistan? Did it just appear that there was Annie in Afghanistan?
Well, I shelved the book um, for a good 4 years. I shelved
Mhm.
that manuscript, and I went on and wrote a young adult novel set in Zimbabwe, which is a place I have been many, many times and I know very well. And that book had a lot of interest in it, but it ultimately did not sell. So that was when I kept thinking about Annie Hawkins Green, and I
Good.
went back to it
There
and said,
going, remember me? Remember me?
and get your act together here. So I went back to Annie Hawkins. I shelved the Zimbabwe novel, took Annie Hawkins off the shelf. And when she and I decided that she was a war photographer, I realized I needed a war. And
Mm,
I decided that I also wanted a war where the US had a presence and preferably that there were coalition forces there. That was very important to me. And I had also read a huge amount about Afghanistan and fiction written by Afghan writers, a few novels set in Afghanistan. The people of Afghanistan are so warm and friendly. They have such a rich culture and history and traditions, and it just all came together. Hence Afghanistan.
that's fantastic. Um, I had tried to make my second novel about Rwanda because I know Rwanda better, but it kept being Southern Sudan, and it worked better because of the kind of civil war that was going on. I could talk about all the different facets of it. So I totally understand. It can't just be any war or any country. It comes to us. So I'm thrilled that you wrote about Afghanistan because I have always wanted to go there and tried to get there 3 or 4 times. So it's been said that you write about, well, now let's go to this one first. You're so good with the details of conflict, and yet you've never been there.
Correct.
And I would love to know, what did you observe certain things in your travels, or that 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 were the kinds of detail, because they're little conflicts every day.
Yeah.
Um, or did you come to write about conflict and all that amazing detail through your research? Because there's very detailed research that's gone into these books, and it's obvious.
Um, well, I hope they flow and that there's
I,
not, oh, that's researched and that's researched. But
no,
I
no, no, no.
I have traveled extensively for photo shoots. I've been to countries around Afghanistan and interacted with many people, um, Kazakhs, Tajiks, um, many people who are among the 37 speakers of languages who live in Afghanistan. And so I did get to know people. I also, during the writings of the books, I was corresponding with people living in Kabul. And so that was helpful. But there was a tremendous amount of research. And I learned very early on that the internet could be my best friend, so long as I quadruple, quintuple checked everything, then doubted it, and then went back and checked it some more. And I was astounded by what I could find on the internet. I made wonderful serendipitous discoveries. Landays is one of the things that I discovered. They are the 22 syllable poems that are an oral tradition. They have been around since 1690 or so, and they are composed by women who, under Pashtun tribal law, were not allowed to learn to read or write. And they also were strictly forbidden to love. But of course, women do love, and women tell stories, and women convey their love. And so they would compose these songs for their beloveds, rarely for their husbands, whom they often referred to as the old goat, because they might well be a second, third, or fourth wife married to a much older man. And these poems are still being written today, composed today. The ones that we see written, there are several beautiful collections of them, and they can also be found online, have been translated and transcribed by others. And they're just spectacular poems. I was researching something about Afghan food when I came across Landays, and I immediately knew that they had to feature in all of the books, both as character interactions, character reveals, but also as key plot points. And so the other really interesting thing is a lot of my descriptions, I found videotapes on YouTube, which I watched, and so was able to use that as a foundation to describe some of the settings. I even found in Behind the Lens and in Double Exposure, Annie drives up the river road along the Panjshir River going into Panjshir Valley. And I can't tell you how many videotapes there are on YouTube put on by Afghans who are videotaping their drive up the river road.
I've seen one of them actually a long, long time ago too. I wonder if it's a major trade route as well, or at least maybe it used to be. Okay.
Yeah.
So Landays, did you write those? The ones in your books? They're beautiful.
Yes, I did. I wrote them. Originally, I was going to use the ones that are in these two collections that I discovered. And I contacted the anthologists, and they said no, that I could not have permission to use them because I was selling my books. And at any rate, so that was actually a blessing, because I was able to really,
Blessing to us.
well, I was able to tailor each of the Landays in the way I wanted. So Seema and her questionable boyfriend write Landays back and forth to each other, and I was really able to make hers teenage girly, and his I was able to make much more raw and choppy and uneducated. And then it turns out that Annie's love interest, Captain Finn Sorelli, who is a big hulky US Navy SEAL, is a poetry lover and is a fairly renowned Landay writer. And in fact, both boys and girls, men and women in Afghanistan now write Landays, and they call them into late night talk radio shows. At any rate, so I wanted to flip things a little, and instead of having Annie write Landays, I wanted Sorelli to write.
Well, it's really nice because you've got a masculine and a feminine side to both characters, which makes them a perfect couple. And to me, it's a perfect man who has a little bit of a feminine side and loves poetry or art. And so I wanted to say you were probably able to better use them as breadcrumbs in the plot too, being able to write them yourselves rather than, not yourselves. I'm
Sometimes I
still,
feel that there are multiples.
yeah, well, it feels like it sometimes when you're writing, especially when you're writing about a romantic relationship, and there's more than just one in this. I don't mean romantic, but there are many layers to relationship that I love in this book. And there's obviously the one between Sorelli and Annie, which people might focus on, especially the people that like traditional romance, because this is a love story. But there's another kind of love story here, and that's her friendship with Daria
Yes.
and how it continues. That's all I'll say. But can you delve into that friendship more?
That friendship between Annie and Daria was really the heart of
Mm.
this story for me. These two women meet their first day as freshmen in college. They become very, very close, but they certainly toss it up between the two of them. When Annie tries to set Daria up with her Afghan math tutor, Daria explodes. I am American. I don't want to be matched up with an Afghan. And yet she ends up marrying him. And there was a lot more about their relationship that ended up on the cutting room floor. There,
Mm.
and it may come back in the future, but there was a wonderful chapter. One of my favorite chapters that I've ever written is of a trip to Democratic Republic of Congo that Annie and Daria take. Daria is a human rights attorney for the UN, and Annie gets the gig to go along as the photographer. And they are going to investigate the rapes of all of these women and girls in DRC.
Mhm.
And while she's there, Annie is pregnant and is being manipulated by the lieutenant who is in charge of them and guiding them around. And Daria comes to her rescue. And there are a number of just wonderful interactions. Daria adores Annie, and Annie adores Daria. They are very, very close. They can almost
There's
read each
nothing
other's
like those
hearts.
friends you meet when you're 18. There's just
Yeah.
nothing like that.
And these are two women now in their 30s who fully expect to grow old together and always have that ability to fight, but to make up and to always be connected.
Mhm.
And there is an argument scene that happens between them in Behind the Lens, and there is a makeup scene that happens. And I'm not
Well,
going to say the spoiler.
yeah,
So
yeah, I'm gonna keep going. But I do want to say that I would love to read The Cutting Room Floor. You know I would, because there's so many similarities of my own
yeah.
experience. It's kind of amazing. Um, so you a lot of reviewers and people that have been interviewing you have said you write about hard-ass women. I don't know how Annie could have been anything different, and I'm so glad you do, but I'd love to hear what your definition of what hard-ass means to you. I know of what I think it means, but it's how is Annie hard-ass?
I think Annie is really complex.
She is.
And let me just couch all of this with photojournalism, especially war photography, is still an old boys network game. And to succeed as a woman in that game is really, really tough, and you have to know how to play the game and play it well.
Mhm.
And I read so many essays by women who have tried to break into the field and who've gone through horrendous hazing, including one Middle Eastern photographer who was hazed by her team, who they were in Libya, and they drove her out to the airport and left her there just as a battle was erupting. To survive that kind of hazing that she survived, that Annie survives, takes an incredible amount, I think, of bravery and courage and a real drive to do what it is you're doing, which is
And
photography, which is photographing war, but also civilians. Annie's real forte is photographing the ordinary people who are just trying to survive a war. And it's getting through that with an incredible adrenaline rush. And part of that rush is that you have survived to live another day, to come back and do it again. One of the biggest challenges that Annie has is her first husband, Todd, who can't cope with her going and
Mhm.
who feels it's too dangerous, who worries too much. And they have a 6-year-old daughter at that time. And he assumes that, when push comes to shove, Annie will come down on the side of staying with her family, keeping that intact and making sure her daughter has a mother. Annie doesn't come down on that side. And part of her complexity is she feels tremendous guilt about having made that decision, about deciding to go out on assignment in very dangerous places for weeks and months at a time. But she is so committed to what she does that she does that.
I love her complexity. I also love her independence.
Yeah.
She's not gonna let anybody tell her how to live her life. And yet she is such a loving mother and such a loving partner, right? I mean, she really does love deeply. I I just adored the character.
You. I have heard people say that they like Annie a great deal, but they they have found a book boyfriend in Sorelli.
Yes, well, I might be one of those. You
Oh,
know, he is incredibly supportive, but the other thing is that it's a real life relationship. Um, it's not a concocted trope, and that's what I loved about it most. He's incredibly supportive, and sometimes maybe even more supportive than I've ever experienced in my life. But I think it's because he's been there, done that. And whenever he crosses that line, she points her finger and says, "Look, I'm not doing this for you. You don't do it for me. You don't tell me what to do." And he concedes, sometimes willingly, and sometimes it takes a couple days. But I think that's what I love the most about it, is that I it was pretty rare in my generation that this kind of relationship happened. I'm very lucky to have had a husband that let me go and let me have kids really late in life and right? See, that's my
mhm.
generation's mindset. Um, the new generation, especially my daughter's age, she's 23. Of course, they're going to go do what they need to do in their life, and if they have kids, they're going to work that in. Um, I think it's more doable, even if you're in dangerous territory these days. I made the decision not to be at risk as much. That was still my decision. So that's what I love about them, is that it's real. It's not all muscles. There's plenty of that, but they're a real couple with real challenges that they're trying to overcome. So And one of those is PTSD.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that in addition to having a realistic love affair, because in my experience, there is a lot of interaction in missions between the photojournalists, the journalists, the military, and the humanitarians, and you've done that really well, and you've brought in PTSD in a sensitive way. I think we might see more of what's going on later, but anybody that's gone through what Annie went through would have some of it. And so my question, mainly because of my own experience in the field and in my childhood, but I think a lot of children who grow up in that kind of unpredictable environment gravitate to a humanitarian or a journalistic kind of job. I'm not saying all. I always have to say that, but it was definitely my experience. And it took me a long time to realize that my body reacted to sound and touch in a different way the older I got. So do you think Annie's was the main event, which I won't go into because I don't want to spoil anything, in the first novel that goes into the second novel?
And
Or
into the third.
yeah, I know it just keeps going. Or is it a culmination or an accumulation, or did it start and it wasn't ever going to go away until she dealt with it?
I think ultimately everything began with the main event that happens in 2006. Annie successfully buries it because to stick with her career, that's her only option. And so she doesn't do anything about it. She is amazingly able to keep it buried, as Toni Morrison says, locked in a metal box in her heart that has rusted shut. And then when she goes back to Afghanistan in 2015 to teach that photography workshop at the girls' school, a number of things happen. And that box opens and PTSD comes out full blown. And there's no putting it back inside her anymore. It's she has to deal with it, but she doesn't deal with it until
So typical.
yeah, at the end of Double Exposure, she finally realizes that she's got it's if she wants to continue her job, her career, her life, being a mother, being a lover, being in relationships, she's got to deal with it because she is going off the deep end. And could I also just say, these books are written in the first person, so you are always in Annie's head. And I think one of the aspects of the suspense is that you're inside the head of someone who's suffering from PTSD. And so she's never sure what's real, and neither are you as the reader.
I am going to take a break and look for questions. Patricia Sands is here and she says, hello, lovely to see you both. It's so good to see you too, Patricia. Another guest on Story Hour. And let me just refresh. Everybody feel free to comment and question. I'm going to come back at the end of our conversation and check again. But I think that's all we've got right now. But it's so good to see you, Patricia, even though I can't see you.
Hello, Patricia.
So I'd like to turn back to art again and compliment your photo blog. You've been on quite the adventure in life in terms of all the photos you've gotten. And I have my favorite, and I'll tell you in a minute what it is. Probably not, I'm not alone in it, probably. Um, but do you have a favorite memory or a favorite photograph you'd like to tell us about? Both the experience and the photo itself.
I think a lot of photographers and a lot of photojournalists have what I call an iconic image.
Mhm.
And my iconic image that I issued on limited edition and is now gone, although I do have a copy hanging on my wall, is Mayan Girl with Corn Dolls.
Mm.
And I, years ago, this image is over 20 years old at this point. I was in the mountains in Honduras, and I was scheduled to have a photo shoot with a young mother, 30 years old, and she had 6 children and very poor Mayan family. And so I literally rode horseback up into the mountains with my camera gear in duffel, in low pros and duffel hanging off the sides of this horse. And this was back in the day when we were all shooting film. And so you didn't really know what you were getting. But I was photographing this woman for hours. And my sense was I wasn't getting anything. And by that point, I had developed this sensory perception of literally my fingers would start to tingle when I
Mhm.
would get a good shot. And that has followed me through. And Annie's fingers tingle too when she has a shot. Um, so I called a break, which was the humane thing to do at this point. And I turned around, and there was this woman's 10-year-old daughter, Sujapa. And she was standing in the corner next to a plastic covered window of their 2-room mud brick hut. And she had her arms curled around about 7 very vibrantly colored corn husk dolls. And this is when I learned that in Honduras, education is free. However, the government mandates that all children getting an education must have a school uniform, and they must purchase the books. And it is the family that has to pay for the uniforms and the books. They change every year, and so there's no such thing as hand-me-downs. If you're dealing with a poor Mayan family in the mountains, they can't afford that. They simply can't. They can't even afford glass in the windows. And so they typically send the firstborn son to school to be educated. All the rest of the children start working at about age 3 or 4 on doing something to help raise money to pay for the oldest brother's school uniform and books. And so 10-year-old Sujapa, whose fingers were permanently stained with the Rit dye that she would be plunging her hands into in the pails. And then twice a week, she would walk for hours down to the tourist village and go to the public market to sell these corn dolls. And it was that experience, taking that picture, which was a one-off. And I mean, typically I shoot a lot of pictures, and this was a one-off. And that reinforced my love, my passion for education, especially for educating girls and women, and especially in countries and cultures where that is not always embraced, such as in Afghanistan, where now we have a government who is forbidding girls from getting an education.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that in a minute.
So your favorite picture?
I want to tell you my favorite picture, but I also want to say that whenever I used to, and I still have to do this to some extent in my own blogs and things, articles, but back in the print days, I would always look at the eyes, and you have such extraordinary depth in in the eyes of your subjects, and it was obvious to me that they the rapport was there, and that is so important in any storyteller's work, that the rapport has to be there. So congrats on that. But it might just be because I've seen so many war photos that I gravitated toward an animal, and it's the elephant with the mud or dirt or something.
Yeah.
There's something about that photograph, especially right now, um, when they are being hunted still.
Yeah.
The innocence and the playfulness and the vibrancy of that animal, they made me tear up, and that's why it's my favorite.
Mhm. I told you that, or maybe I didn't tell you, I put my Zimbabwe novel on the shelf. And when I got around to writing book 3 in the Annie Hawkins series, I was going to send Annie Hawkins as one way of coping with her PTSD, getting her out of war zones. And so I wrote a book where she goes to Zimbabwe and goes as part of a documentary crew to document the Great Elephant Migration, which is a personal experience that I have had. 35,000 elephants and me in a Jeep. It's phenomenal. And then August 15th, 2021 happened, and the Taliban entered Kabul, no resistance. And that third book in the Annie Hawkins Green series went on the shelf. I actually stopped myself from hitting delete, and I rewrote the book for Annie to go back to Afghanistan to cover the story of the Taliban's arrival and taking over of the country, and to help get various acquaintances and friends out of the country. However, I still have that Zimbabwe book on the shelf, and I am now working on it again with a whole new set of characters. So
That is
that
so
book,
fantastic. So
um,
you've got both. You've got
yeah,
both.
yeah, and that will be coming out, and it focuses, unfortunately, on the poaching of elephants. I am
It had
absolutely committed to the conservation of endangered animals, and the whole poaching story is quite.
I'm not even sure I can read it because I don't know. I don't know why I can read about humans and not be able to take the stories about animals. But well, I kind of know, but I uh what an amazing array of experience you have to bring to your novels. And I'm so excited. Okay, so back to, so you finished novel number 1 and you finished novel number 2, I'm assuming, when the US pulled out of Afghanistan. Was that about the timing you were about to launch novel number 2? Or were
Uh, I launched novel number 2 in 2022, but finished it novel number 2 in 2020. And you know as well as I do how long it can take a book to get to press.
Yeah, well, especially in 2020, that any books get out at all that had anything that were in process in 2020 is a bit of a miracle these days. And it shows how good they are. Um, so in a way, what happened changed the course of the books. I also wanted to say that it's my belief that everything has its time, and it's just not going to be published until it's time that people actually are ready for it. And I wonder if that's why the book about the poaching is on the shelf for the moment. I just can't wait, because I think you're probably going to do for animals what you have done for human beings who are subjected to violence. And violence is even too little a word for what people go through in these novels.
Well, I will say that um, in the novels, in novel number 4, which will be called Talking Bones, um, there will be scenes where elephants are snared and injured. And I have been incredibly fortunate to be able to ride with the national vets in Zimbabwe and then and watch them dart the elephants and then be part of the crew as they are in the field operating to remove the snare. And you know, if they can get to the elephant and get that snare off and get antibiotics into the system, they have a real good chance of survival. So most of the violence in Talking Bones is with people because I
Right.
can't kill an animal. I just,
Thank you. I hope that I didn't give away any spoilers, people, but boy, thank you for that, because I'm the same way. I just I can't do it. So we're gonna wrap up in a minute.
ow.
Like to time just flies. What was the biggest insight or lesson you learned with all 4 of your novels? And maybe the young adult book too. Is there something you want to leave the audience with? That-
Um, read, 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 and take risks. Tell the story that you want to tell. Don't worry, know what the rules of your genre are. Know where the book is going to sit on the shelf in a bookstore. But with that in mind, take risks. Tell the story you want to tell the way you need to tell it. I think that's the biggest thing I learned. And it took me a while to get published because of it.
But look at it now. Its time has come. The the readers needed to be ready for it. The world needed to be at a precipice to be able to for it to have the impact that it's having right now. So congratulations. And congratulations on waiting too. That's never easy for an author. Um, um, so I think we've really done it all. I was reading through those last couple of questions, and I'm certain there are going to be more questions from people who watch this on replay. This has just been a stellar interview, and I'm so happy that I really am.
Well, I'm thrilled to have been able to talk with you and to get to know you a bit. And thank you so much for coming up with such insightful questions that many of which are different than other questions I've answered over the
Well,
last.
thank you so much. I think that I just get the genre because it's my genre too. And I also, not the suspense part, although my novels are suspenseful, they're more love stories than thrillers. Although war is ever present. But also it's just lovely to talk to somebody who has the same kind of experience that they're putting into their genre that I do. Um, and and to talk to a real Renaissance woman, because I think well, it's true. You've done a lot with your life. And I think that has to do with what the advice you just gave us, to take risk, always take risks and look for the adventure.
I'll tell you, as my father lay dying years ago, he held my hand and his last words to me were, "Don't die with regrets."
Mhm.
And I really took that to heart and started taking a lot of risks in my life. And I'm very fortunate that I have had some great adventures, and I am able to fictionalize a lot of the moments from those adventures into the novels.
Well, it certainly works, and the world is better for it. I thank you, and I think that advice your father gave you, because I heard something similar. And I always end with a tea bag wisdom. It's not Afghan tea. And today's is trust your identity, be in touch with your reality. And I just
Oh,
choose
wow.
these. I just choose, oh, whoops, I have to do this. I just, these are very randomly chosen, but they usually work. They usually work. So there it is.
Love it. Love it. And I did try to make these books very authentic. I really want the readers to feel that they are in Afghanistan. And I'm sitting here drinking chai.
So that's perfect. So cheers. The um, the thing that I wanted to say that I left out, because we've been so immersed in what we're saying, is that you not only are authentically, you've got an authentic voice and you've got an authentic story, and it's from real life, but people can inhabit Annie, and that's why they fall in love with her. So thank you for that too. You really know your protagonist, and she knows you. Um, so what's next other than your next novel and your next novel?
Oh,
And where can people find you? Not only where can they hear you, but tell us where to find you online, please.
I am on Facebook and Instagram, and I also have a website, which is my name, JeanneeSacken.com. And if I love to hear from people, and there is a contact me um, option on my website. I also absolutely adore going on speaking gigs. I love to go to book clubs. I do that quite often. And currently this weekend, I got my rescheduled to tomorrow. I'm participating in 2 storyteller weeks at high schools in Northern Illinois, and am one of the featured authors and photojournalists going in and doing that.
And tell us about what that is, what the theme of that is, of your talk to the high school students.
Well, what I'm talking about is how my personal favorite photographs helped me create the character of Annie Hawkins Green, and how my experiences capturing those images helped me come up with scenes that I then fictionalized into the 3 novels. And so it's basically, I'm standing on a stage with my images flashing on the screen behind me as I'm telling the stories behind what I went through to capture them.
Well, I wish I were in the audience for that talk. And I hope you do more of those kinds of talks, because I love how art imitates life and life imitates art, and how you can mesh them together in terms of all the art that you have been exposed to and have experienced in your lifetime. I checked for comments. Ruth Wilson says, hello, how are you? Hi, Ruth.
Hi, Ruth.
Um, but I think that's going to be it. But please, everybody, leave your comments and questions, because I'm going to be thinking about this interview for a while. And if you watch it and it's thought-provoking, please do let us know, and leave a question or a comment, or contact Jeannee directly. And I want to spell out her name. It's, are there 2 N's?
Would you like me to spell it?
Please. I
It
just started to doubt myself.
JeanneeSacken.
Thank you. So everybody that knows French, it is pronounced like there's an accent aigu, but you don't need to put that in the domain name. And you'll see more of a photo blog at her website, other interviews, and both in print and on video, and some more of her writing, more about her writing. And you could find out more about me and my work at katherinebrownramsperger.com. It's my name now. I'm so excited. I'm revealing it bit by bit, but I'm about to launch it full time, so go check it out. And my coaching site's groundonecoaching.com. Stay tuned for news about our March Story Hour. I'm cooking up something really good for it. Because there's been some juggling going on, and it's going to be even more special than what I originally had intended. Jeannee, thank you so much. I wish you all the best with your writing, and thank you so much for your books. And everyone who's listening, I'm wishing you a wonderful rest of your February with maybe a good romantic tale to read, maybe one of Jeannee's books. And no matter what, I wish you a great book to read, maybe fireside with those you love. Till next time, I take care, everybody. Thanks, Jeannee.
Thank you so much.